This show is such a cultural melting pot of so many different people, of so many different backgrounds, ethnically, socioeconomically. I mean, it's a microcosm. You have everything. You can get every style. You have sort of this international flavor of each differing dance styles, different cultures, and what they have to bring to the table.
I think a lot of people have seen the Nutcracker and are used to sort of that classical version. Our show's really not like that, so it's sort of all the fun parts. That's why it's our sweet and spicy. So it's got sass, it's got playfulness. It's just completely different.
Its relevance in today's culture has to do a lot with tying in all parts of our diaspora, bringing in a lot of different backgrounds, and just kind of coming together and working in one project.
I'm Carolyn Payne, and I am the director and creator and choreographer of Nutcracker Suite and Spicy. So I grew up doing the Nutcracker with Boston Ballet as a child performer there. So by the time I reached adulthood and was performing as a professional dancer, I had been in the Nutcracker so many times for, decades. I got this idea to try to update the show, and I wanted to make it not just more relevant to a contemporary audience, but also something that can respond to how the world has changed socially and politically, and just what audiences expect to see from the traditional show.
This production's very, very unique as a Nutcracker because Carolyn's vision for this is more of a modern take and a very relatable take on the Nutcracker story. The first half is very much a big party with ugly sweaters and very modern costumes. She even uses modern renditions of the classic Nutcracker music for it. So it's like Brian Setzer's version of some of it, or you've got even new age artists are put into the soundtrack as well. And she wanted really to create a world that people can relate to, but it's definitely a heightened world. So a lot of saturated colors, a lot of bold looks, a lot of interesting versions of different characters over the last 10 years as they've been evolving.
Instead of your traditional Nutcracker that's just strictly ballet, which is always beautiful, this has such diversity in it, and there's always something new to notice whenever you go to see the show.
I'm so lucky I did this when I was really, really young, but that first year was honestly so challenging just because we were starting with nothing. And I was trying to sell a show to an audience that I wasn't even sure what I was selling yet. And it had all these great concepts and we had some really good dancing, but we just didn't have the money to have the kind of lighting or flesh out all the costumes or even all of the characters. It had to be a smaller cast that year. We had a lot less rehearsal time. We didn't have the luxury of knowing already what could work and what was going to work. It was much more trial and error. So I think the biggest challenge the first year was that it existed in my head. Even getting the dancers to understand some of the concepts and everything was so challenging. And I think that what was so amazing is the cast that I had that first year, they stuck with it and also jumped in to believe. As we were formulating this idea, I then started to kind of formulate some of the other fun ideas for the show, like the ugly sweater party scene, and figuring out how to create this act 2 that would be totally unique and feature different kinds of dancing that was inspired by the music. The first scene that I sort of came up with in my mind was the snowball. The snow scene is one of the most beautiful scenes in the Nutcracker, and the music by Tchaikovsky is exquisite. And I had this concept that it would be really funny, but also beautiful and so challenging to create this snow scene that used giant white pearly Pilates balls as snowballs. Instantaneously, I realized that the reason this had never been done before is because it was a really bad idea. We just kept falling off these balls and like hitting face first and just falling backwards, and nothing could look graceful, but I knew that it was there, and I knew if we could kind of harness this and find ways to make this beautiful, it would be incredible.
The snow scene is very unique in a lot of ways. There's a ton of things going on, and it's definitely very crazy for all of us on stage, but it shows up. It shows up as something really beautiful to the audience. So we have the yoga balls, which is obviously quite different than the typical snow scene. We're rolling around, we're flipping over them. There's somersaults, there's acrobatic tricks. And then to add to that, there's a ton of snow falling from the ceiling, and we're sliding all over the place. We're flopping off of the balls, and that's how it feels to us. And we're sweating, and it's crazy. But when you watch it back, it is a very, very cool and unique thing to see. And I think that that's what a lot of people that come back year and year again to see the show, that's one of the things that they bring up, that they say that they love about Carolyn's Nutcracker.
We're making up all of the floret choreography because we're taking a traditionally ballet piece and making it more of a Rockette style kickline and really using the personality. And when we started this, we had more people who had the strong background in ballet. So I think training some of them to come out of their comfort zone was really fun.
When I came in as the Arabian, it was completely modern. I'm used to doing more ballet, and it just completely changed that idea of what the Arabian was supposed to look like. Usually you have like, a lot of running and floating. We stayed very centered. A lot of groundwork, strong lifts, things like that really changed from what I was expecting.
I think by the time we had approval and we had a theater to do the show in, we had a very small timeline to pull it off. So we were setting the finale on stage in the theater 2 days before we went on, as the lights are going on around us. We're sort of taping and sewing costumes backstage, like as we're about to go on. So it was a crazy year, but we've grown a lot from that.
It was just overwhelming. Like, we got into the theater and we hadn't even set all the choreography yet. We were literally setting choreography on the stage at dress rehearsal. And we were shorthanded because we just didn't have the budget to be paying a stage crew. Costumes weren't finished. Everything just needed time, and you don't have it. That first year, we were just lucky that a show was getting on stage. And I went outside up to the loading dock to get a breath of air with a couple of the other dancers because I was so overwhelmed. I just felt like I couldn't breathe. I was so overwhelmed and so nervous. And I remember just saying, like, we just need somebody to come in and help. We just need somebody to help with this. I don't even know what to do. I'm terrified. I wish I had never done this show. And we came back downstairs and we continued rehearsal. And about 10 minutes later, I got a call from the stage door, and they said that there was a guy here to see me. And I was like, I don't know who is here to see me. And I went upstairs, and there was a young man there, and he said, I'm here to work the show. And I was like, who are you? And he's like, oh, I'm here to work the show. I heard you needed help. And I remember just saying to him, where did you hear this? And he just said, I heard you need help. So I hired him. So I hired a complete stranger who walked in off the street, and he did everything. He was running around backstage. He was like organizing props. He was doing all the things. He was helping finish costumes. He did all these things that we needed to get done. Were just amazingly, magically getting done. And we just had no idea where he came from. It was like we were just given this gift of this human who just appeared. And it's like one of those crazy things because I wrote him a check at the end of the run, and the check was never cashed. He had left that day without saying goodbye. We still to this day have never heard from him, and those who were there, we just have no idea who he was, where he came from. But at that moment and since, I've kind of looked back at that and thought, like, you know what? That was like that gift that you get, that like when you're at that low point in a show and you're just trying to like get something like this off the ground, that was like that kind of inspiration and hope, like that we could keep going. Because I at that moment when he came into that production, it was like such a high stress moment of not knowing whether or not that show was even what the curtain was gonna open on that opening night. So it was kind of crazy. Sort of has lived on in Nutcracker Suite and Spicy legend.
So in 2017, I was in a production of The Music Man, and I ruptured my Achilles on stage during the show. I think I was in shock because I didn't feel it wasn't that big. It didn't hurt. I just kind of military crawled off stage right and found a PA and said, I need to go to the hospital. Carolyn was there. My first text to her was, it wasn't even, I ruptured my Achilles. My first text to her was, you need to find another Nutcracker. That was the first thing I said, because I knew I'd be out for that.
My Nutcracker prince, Alex, had torn or ruptured his Achilles tendon, and he was out for the season, which was very traumatic because he's the only partner I had really danced with for a long time. And so I was with a new partner for the whole season, which it was going fine until I tore my hamstring 2 weeks before the show. And, you know, I kept rolling along. I did my thing. I did what I had to do. But then the week of the show, Carolyn broke her ankle.
I went to go pick up a costume from the costumer, and I slipped on the ice in the parking lot and shattered my ankle. And not only am I the director and choreographer, but I'm dancing in the show. So as soon as I fell on that pavement and I heard that crack, I knew I wasn't dancing. I knew I wasn't walking. I was not even heartbroken about that. I knew I was going to be facing surgery and a long recovery, but all I could think about was the show and the impact. And one of the dancers, who is also one of my best friends and an original cast member, called me while I was still at the hospital. She said, "Don't worry, I have the video, I'm learning your role."
We all got through that. We all came together. We brought back people who from Nutcracker's past, and everyone sort of pitched in, and we had to bring in dancers who hadn't danced in years, and they stepped right in, and everyone stepped up.
I have hard evidence. I went through photos from last year. I have hard evidence. The early stages of this was about compiling a creative team around me, and I wanted that to be the dancers. What is traditionally a choreographer and dancer role, where a lot of choreographers and directors are like, this is what I want, and this is what I'm going to tell you to do. I had the vision, and I said, this is what I want out of this scene. Let's work together to make this happen. And I think that that's what makes these dancers so eager to get to return to the show and be part of it, is that a part of them is in this show and is in these characters.
I think once we sort of cast who was going to take the lead on each of the numbers, as you'll call them, We sort of styled it around what they did best, and each of us was really involved with making those parts our own and setting them.
I was able to do exactly what I wanted with this show. I mean, it's very collaborative. Everything, Carolyn ensures that no one is going to go on stage doing something that they're not comfortable with, and furthermore, she's going to make sure that everyone's highlight reel is showcased. Everyone's best qualities are put forward, everyone's best abilities are put forward, and it was the same thing with me.
Carolyn creates a real dope environment where it's like, okay, here's like 2 8 counts, like go ahead and just make it and do whatever. And that gives you an opportunity to be creative and kind of put your own stamp on the show. So it's not just coming from one source, it's like more like a group effort to kind of come together and make something. And we all feel like we have ownership in it that way, you know?
Some of the greatest parts of working in this Nutcracker has been standing in a rehearsal and watching another variation go forth and being able to say, hey, I saw something. What do you think about this? And people are receptive to that. Traditionally, you don't find that. Most of the times you sit in the corner, you shut your mouth, you don't say anything. But this Nutcracker has really opened the ground for us to be able to talk with one another, work with one another well. And even when we don't work well with one another, we're still cordial. You know, we still know how to have a conversation with each other and still get the job done.
I think the best thing about this version of the Nutcracker is that it really incorporates all different styles of dance. So we've got hip hop, we've got tap, we've got ballroom, we've got ballet. Our show has it all, and it's great to work with people who are great dancers in different fields that you wouldn't normally get to work with, and it's really just like coming home to your dance family.
I really think that mixing different types of dancers and their styles, mixing hip-hop dancers with ballet dancers and jazz dancers and tap dancers, I think that creates something really magical. And I think that that's something that isn't done enough in dance. Usually you'll see a Nutcracker, it's just ballet out there, or you'll see a show, it's just hip hop. But when you put those dancers together, and we're in this collaborative space together where we can come up with new ideas and we can ping pong off of each other, there's always great new things that come out of that.
This show has everything from ballet to modern to hip hop to jazz to breakdancing to Latin ballroom to acrobatics. And that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to compile a cast of dancers who are the best in what they can bring to the table. And then not only have them shine in the elements that they are just experts at, but to challenge them to work together. Nutcracker Suite and Spicy to me is a Nutcracker for today. It is what I think if the Nutcracker was just being invented. I think it is what would have evolved from the original E.T.A. Hoffman story. And this show is set in an urban environment, and an urban environment reflects different people of different cultures living and working together. And I think that that's what's cool in this show and really helps make it much more relevant. A lot of dance companies are now facing the challenge of how to look at Act 2 with all these different cultural references in the divertissement in Act 2. And this show was sort of at the vanguard of changing how we do that. Instead of just a Spanish dance, I went so far as to make it a Latin ballroom piece. And instead of having Chinese, which can traditionally be one of the problematic scenes that audiences are now facing, I made it sort of this Asian-inspired bird, like a peacock, and used like a very flute-driven composition of that music. Instead of having the Russian part, we actually utilized that music for the Nutcracker and for a different version for the hip-hop soldiers. It's how the world now is just a much more like global society, and we're much more sensitive about how we're depicting different cultures and how we're looking at cultures. And I think that that's something that was outdated about the old Nutcracker. So that was something that even 10 years ago, I wanted to make sure that we were doing differently. A couple years ago, we started facing the hashtag #MeToo movement, and it was something that I wanted to make sure I responded to in this show with the club rat scene and how Clara interacts with him, and making sure that it is very clear that she is a strong woman who can handle herself and is not gonna put up with that kind of nonsense, as no woman should.
The scene starts out with the Nutcracker dancing with his soldiers, and it's very happy, and Clara decides that she wants to come out and join the party. And Clara's dancing in the club with the Nutcracker when the Rat King dive rolls out onto the stage, and he tries to steal her away from the Nutcracker. And the soldiers and the Nutcracker, they're fighting the Rat King, and they're blocking Clara from him trying to save her. And in the end, Clara is the one who ultimately triumphs over him, and she leaves him flat on his back on the stage and runs off with the Nutcracker. Clara ultimately doesn't really need a man. Clara can take care of herself, and I think that's a really good message to send to the audience.
The first year, it was like line drawings on that blank piece of paper. And any time that you are just starting with a blank piece of paper, it's really hard to show everyone and be like, this is gonna be art, I promise. And now, 10 years later, it's like a much more fleshed out work of art. Now you can really see all the colors and the style. So we have a creepy Nutcracker who has sort of become the mascot for our show. The Nutcracker prop we used the first year, after a couple years on stage, got a little bit battered. And I excitedly bought a new one that was like all covered in sparkles and was gonna look great on stage. And one day we came in after, during Tech Week, and the brand new Nutcracker I'd bought had vanished. No one knew what happened to him or claimed to. And but there, right out in open, was the creepy Nutcracker that I was convinced I had thrown away. So creepy Nutcracker got to return to stage that year and has been part of the show ever since. And the tech crew makes silly videos with him and has him creeping around the theater. One year they hung him up in the rafters without telling anyone, so that when we were on stage and flopped on a snowball, you looked up and you saw this Nutcracker staring down at you. Sometimes he's just standing in a wing, or he's behind a door in a dressing room. And it just has kind of become this fun inside joke that this Nutcracker is plaguing upon us and creeping into our nightmares. And he's funny. I don't enjoy seeing him. I don't want him to come home with me because I still don't know why he exists, but creepy Nutcracker has become a big part of Nutcracker Sweet and Spicy. So I guess wherever this show goes on to, and however it continues to evolve and perform, I guess creepy Nutcracker will be part of this show forevermore.